everyone. Thanks again for joining us. This is another edition of the Bastian Round Table. Today, we've got Kyle Rogers, co-founder of uTenant, with us. I guess just in terms of theme, what we're going to be talking about today is, certainly here in ANZ, but also across Asia Pacific, a lot of activity around industrial property. We had Lee Williams on from eStore a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about Black Friday and obviously e-commerce and the shift from bricks and mortar. But there's a lot of conversations and a lot of advisory work, consulting, and dialogue around warehousing, industrial facilities, and property that comes with the change in consumer demand, a need, a desire to be closer to the customer. Consumers expect a shorter delivery time, and that last mile delivery is becoming increasingly important. But obviously you need to be closer to the customer to be able to deliver to those quicker timeframes. So I thought it'd be interesting to bring Kyle on, talk a little bit about what uTenant is, what they do, and the services they provide, and then we'll just go through a couple quick trends and what we're seeing. So just a quick summary on Kyle. So Kyle, lifelong supply chain professional, been in Australia for a number of years now. Has had a career in EFM, works for Silk with contract logistics as a BDM. He's currently co-founder at uTenant, also the director for Victoria and Tasmania with the Supply Chain and Logistics Association of Australia. So really strong rep in the market, well-known individual, and definitely one of the bright stars in the industry, up and coming right now. So Kyle, just tell us a little bit about what uTenant is.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Thanks for the introduction. Obviously, it's good to have a chat to you. I've been watching your growth for quite some time. I'm really honored to be on the show. So, guys, uTenant, a really innovative platform in the warehousing and industrial property space. So, if you think about multi-sided platforms, multi-sided marketplaces, we're exactly that. So, if you look at how people traditionally sourced industrial property and traditionally sourced warehousing / 3PL, we have brought three sides of a market together into one platform. Most businesses operate off what's known as a two-sided platform. So as an example, someone with pallets looking for someone with storage space to make a match, and then you would have to make a revenue in between. So unlike other models like uTenant, the warehouse and matchmaker, in the US, like Warehouse Exchange is a new startup over there, Flex Logistics, which is a really big warehouse brokerage firm in the US, and Stoga in the UK. We actually have taken their model, which is a brokerage firm that clips the ticket on both sides. We've actually taken that model, we run that model for free. So we don't charge businesses with storage, looking for storage space, let's call it a major retailer, right? And 3PLs with storage space. We use that to help the tenants, and then we help them with their industrial property, similar to a traditional real estate agent. When searching for an industrial property, and we get paid from the landlord. So there's really three main parts to the business. You've got businesses, which are also tenants that have the product, own the product. Then the other type of tenant is 3PL logistics service providers who want to store the product. And then finally, you've got the landlords who own the buildings. And this is a common misconception in the industry, and what some people don't know per se, because you don't know what you don't know. 91%, our figures suggest, so 91% of all facilities in Australia over 5,000 square meters are leased, i.e. rented by from landlords. So the majority of businesses that you drive past an industrial precinct you'll see will be leased.
Right. Okay. That's a much higher value, the number than I thought it would be. So you're talking about all the major 3PLs as well then too.
Correct. So there's very few businesses today, Tony, and for the audience knowledge, that own their buildings. And the reason that is that businesses, are making acquisitions, they're making divestments, they've got multiple sites they want to merge. Their sales may go up, their sales may go down. So every 3 to 5, 7 to 10 year lease contract, they can pick up and move somewhere else depending on the market shifts and demands. And with COVID, which we'll get into later, they may have all their eggs in one basket in one state, but if they own the property, they couldn't diversify. But because it's a lease, they can wait till that ends and then potentially open up smaller satellite warehouses in every state. So in a nutshell, we make our revenue from landlords when we do industrial leasing deals from property. How do we add more value to the tenants? We help them find and fill their excess space at no cost.
Okay. Okay. Man, that's definitely, I mean, a change in the model, at least from what I understood it to be when I got into this space a long time ago. What was it about that uTenant that made you, I guess, move away from traditional logistics or 3PLs to more of a tech-enabled solution?
Yeah, no, so it's a really good question. So my background back in Ireland, come also work for family business, which is in logistics, haulage, and distribution,
Yep.
manufacturing.
Yep.
So it was always in my blood. So I always had the physical side of it. I was brought up driving forklifts,
Okay.
loading trucks, unloading containers, delivery vans. We had cold storage plant, manufacturing, as I mentioned. So
Yeah.
it's all blood. Studied logistics in university, and then when I arrived in Australia, as you mentioned, worked for EFM, which is Australia's largest freight brokerage for
Yep.
distribution. $300 million business, which
Hmm.
recently partly acquired by Singapore Post, as you may know. And
Yep.
then working there for a while, I really got to understand the geographical footprint of Australia and which carriers and which logistics parties do what and do it
Yep.
well, and ones that don't do other things so well.
Sure.
Then an opportunity arrived at Silk, which is 3PL, to work for one of the largest privately owned third-party logistics companies,
Hmm.
because I wanted to see the freight again, see the product moving, understand warehousing, but also understand what happens left of the warehouse inbound, which is the wharf cartage and freight forwarding.
Yep.
And it was probably a mentor of mine. I've mentioned him a few times, Matthew Barbuto, who was one of the main directors of EFM Logistics, and has been CEO of multiple roles in there. He's very tech focused, and very innovative and driven. And I had a chat to
Sure.
him about a role came up at uTenant that it was just Matt Sampson, the founder at the time.
Yeah.
He had this grand vision and wanted me to come on board to disrupt the industrial property and warehousing industry. And it
Yep.
was really a good chat with him, and said, this is where the future is going. And this is, with EFM, they're non-asset based. The largest, pretty successful company is if you can enable things, but in a tech sense. And if you look
Hmm.
at the industrial property industry, it's still, how could you say this? It's not very tech driven. It's still
Sure.
quite archaic in its way, and it's still
Yeah. Yeah.
it's quite manual how people source industrial property.
Yep.
And then when I sat down with Matt, I said, okay, here's the problem you're trying to solve. You're trying to help tenants meet landlords in a confidential, transparent way directly through technology.
Right.
So paradoxical to me, having a chat to you, we're trying to remove the middleman
Right. Yep.
from industrial property transactions. So
Yep.
then when I sat down with Matt, I said, well, if I can cross-pollinate what I've learned at EFM and Silk Logistics, I
Yep.
said there's another problem here, which, let's forget about the landlords for a second, because there are suppliers. They'll have a warehouse for us to lease
Yep.
if we can control the tenant. Then I said, if you look at other, successful startups like YouTube, they subsidize parts of the platform to make revenue from another part. So on
Right.
YouTube, you can upload videos for free.
Hmm.
You can watch videos for free. But
Hmm.
YouTube knew once they got enough eyes on the screen of people uploading and people watching, they can monetize the third side, which is advertising. So when we sat down and we strategized, and with my mentor, Matthew Barbuto, we said, well, how do we add more value to the tenant? Because it's all about you, the tenant.
Yeah.
And we said, why don't we make it free for businesses, tenants that need extra storage
Hmm.
space or are unhappy with their current 3PL
Hmm.
to find a new 3PL? Because that's
Right.
how the market's split. If you're a tenant of industrial facility, you're either a
Yeah.
product owner or shipper, or you're a
Yeah.
3PL.
Correct. Yeah.
So if we could help
Yeah.
those guys for free, create more
Yeah.
value,
Yeah.
we'd be in a better position to win the property work. And that's how the whole thing came about. We
Huh.
realized that we could enable this all through a technology platform. Think
Yeah.
about an ecosystem
Yeah.
of warehousing providers, tenants, product owners, shippers alike, to come together in a confidential and transparent way and meet the perfect match, whether that's
Yeah.
for one pallet, 100 pallets, 1,000 pallets, or an entire new industrial facility.
Wow. I mean, that sounds fascinating. I mean, the logic is pretty sound in my head, but it's definitely a different view. And you have all of these traditional businesses, either the advisory space or 3PLs, or the industrial property businesses like the CBREs and the JLLs and all things like that, who have built these infrastructures around a specific process and a specific way of doing things. So it's definitely interesting. And again, it goes back to my earlier point that this entire kind of facilities, warehousing, distribution center space is at the center of almost every conversation, not only in terms of supply chain, but business right now, because these existing networks just aren't built for the new world we live in, and so they're not coping. They're either too big or too slow or in the wrong position. And so there's just been, I mean, it's amazing how many conversations right now that I'm having on the recruitment side for skills around network optimization, network configuration, the center of gravity, DC design, DC automation, all of those skills right now, anything to do with where should we put it, how should we build it, and what should we put in it, it's just a hot space right now for sure. I did want to ask you just in terms of trends. We're in peak period right now. We're mid-November. I think for the next, certainly 5-6 weeks here in ANZ, and regionally probably another 8 weeks with Lunar New Year, Chinese New Year coming up as well. What are you seeing in terms of either industries that are seeking more space or I guess unique situations right now that are popping up, not only because of COVID but the time of year? Anything you can kind of share with us?
Yeah, sure. So definitely a spike in demand, Tony, for 3PL. A lot more businesses, I think, are going to be moving to third-party logistics. Reason being is, I know this has been covered by many people in articles I've read in recent weeks and months, is because of COVID. In Australia, given its geographical footprint with large, densely populated cities, a lot of major retailers, shippers, product owners, as I like to call them, FMCGs, they have all their eggs in one basket.
Yep.
Have one major DC in Melbourne, Sydney, or Brisbane, depending on where their head office was. And that's important because freight distribution costs outbound is pro-rated the highest cost in a logistics manager, supply chain manager's P&L. So they try to keep everything under one roof, but in saying that, it costs a lot more to send everything from from Sydney to Perth, from Melbourne to Perth. Yes, you could work with it because you'd make savings by having your labor all on one site and having, as we like to call it, one throat to choke, and having one warehouse, everything under one roof.
Yep.
But why people want things, as we all know, faster, quicker delivery times, and that's going to be hard if your warehouse is in Melbourne and someone orders something in Perth.
Yeah.
It's more going into the psychomechanics of it. Is usually you buy something online or a shop for that matter, a retail outlet, you buy it on demand and you buy it when you need it. And the main difference between, buying in retail, in my opinion, and buying online is when you go to a retail store and you go to a major shopping mall to buy a shirt or to buy a dress for an event that you have coming up, you take out your cash, your credit card, or your watch, and you tap or you pay the cash and you exchange the $200 and you get your goods.
Yep.
So that's a good deal, right? That's a good, negotiating, whatever you want to call it. You've
Depends
paid
what you're buying,
something,
but I understand the concept.
You've got something. You've got something in return. But with online, what happens is that a lot of people talk about is when you buy online, your hard-earned cash gets deposited from your bank account, and you get a notification. You've just $200, but you haven't got the product yet.
Correct.
Wait, product, and the retailer promises you next day, but given COVID, it might not be next day. It might be 2 days. It might be 3 days.
Sure.
So by the time you get the product, you may not need it. That party might have gone. You may be annoyed with the retailer, but it might not be their fault. It could be the Star Trek, the Toll, the DHL, Couriers, Please. So your beef is with the retailer, not the carrier. So I think 3PLs, a lot of businesses are reimagining their supply chains, and they're looking at other ways to store the product in different states so they can be closer to that customer for last mile delivery, but also help with returns, which is really important. So we're finding a lot of businesses, like you said, looking at their inbound data, looking at their SKU master, their sales order data, and saying, where do we need to be? Do we need to have one DC and hold that lease ourselves in, say, Melbourne or Sydney? And then do we 3PL some of our fast moving SKUs in all the other states in order to service our customers quicker? So what we're finding is a lot more activity from 3PLs across the country. I'd say, majority of our work comes from 3PLs, freight forwarders and logistics companies. Because this month alone, we've had a record month at uTenant. We've leased 50,000 square meters of industrial property in Melbourne, and Sydney.
Okay. Wow. Well, that's a great sign for the economy. Obviously, things are improving, I would assume. I guess the only thing I wanted to ask you was as I've talked about the network and where these facilities are based, it has changed. It always will be changing, but I think it's certainly there's a speed to it right at the current time right now that's pretty fast compared to other moments. But what about in terms of micro fulfillment and some of these dark stores as well? I mean, and how does that impact the entire national network and the framework as well? Because it's not a unique topic, but it's a newer concept that's coming into supply chain as well. And I guess how does that impact you guys and just generally the entire space that we have here? Do you see that impacting it significantly, or is it more on a case by case basis and it's more of a, I guess a solution that doesn't impact the overall capability or network scale and size?
Yeah, great question, Tony. No, I think it is going to impact everyone. I think it is happening. I think the first thing we need to realize, like any sort of new innovation, there's that adoption curve. And where we are in that. And I think with artificial intelligence, blockchain, we were talking about that, 5 years ago plus, and drones and driverless vehicles. I think it's definitely going to be the case, because don't quote me on this, but I think JLL posted an article this morning that in Melbourne, occupancy rates in office are like, 8% or something.
Wow.
I mean, not occupancy as in people that are coming into the office. So a lot of people still working from home. So there's going to be a lot of space available in city centers. A lot of old retail stores. There's a high profile retailer closing every month.
Yeah.
There's going to be retail stores available. There might be, say, underground car parks available because people are working from home and deciding to, that there's benefits from working from home or living in the country and spending more time with kids. And actually, maybe for companies, employees spending the commute time working. So I think it is going to happen. The reason being is a lot of the major landlords, like the Goodman, Mirvac, Charter Hall, Logos, 151, Fraser's, I could go on. There's probably 30, 40. This is another quote for the audience. There's probably about 30 or 40 major landlords across Australia that own, say, 80 to 90% of the stock over 5,000 square meters.
Okay, I didn't realize it's such a small group. Okay.
Yeah, so it's hard enough to buy a house these days, never mind buy a 10,000 square meter warehouse. So there's very little mom and dad investors, and as years go by, those mom and dad investors want to sell their nest egg, and they sell it to the major institutional, like an ESR, a Goodman, as I mentioned. Right. Anyway, the point is, those industrial landlords, where a lot of our super funds go to for investment, they just don't own industrial; they own offices and retail stores as well.
Right. Okay.
So a lot of their tenants may be a big retailers, like Kmart, whatever it may be, Target, the list could go on forever, Nike, Adidas. They may have retail stores that are closing due to online demand. They may be turned into, like you said, micro fulfillment, dark stores, or mini warehouses, almost in a sense, Tony, where the major warehouse in, say, Dermot or Eastern Creek in Sydney can replenish the Sydney or the Melbourne CBD shop front overnight. And then deliver to people in the city the next morning. No,
it's definitely, I'm seeing signs of that pop up now as well. Even the Woolworths, where they're converting their back end storage at store to readjust their last mile delivery and their e-com service offering as well. So it's just a really fascinating space for anyone in supply chain and logistics right now. I think anything to do with facilities and properties and where your inventory is, it's the hot topic because of what's happening with e-commerce and the redefined network that we've got. So,
and I'll just extend a little bit more on that, Tony, just before we close off, is over the past 6 months, everyone's been talking about these things, and people are like, oh, what's happening? You talked about reshoring and people moving manufacturing back to Australia and moving stuff out of China into Vietnam and stuff like that will happen to an extent. And people are like, oh, well, nothing's really happening. Nothing's really changing. At the best of times, it takes a long time to get things expensed to the business, for a logistics manager to go to the board, and it's got to go through a long process to get approved.
Correct.
It's hard enough to get a marketing budget approved in some companies, or, we've all been there, right? So to make a big multi-million-dollar decision on operating a warehouse from here to there, or manufacturing plant, that takes time. I think we're in the early stages of discussing these things. Logistics and supply chain managers are starting to understand where the future strategy is, the supply chain strategy in line with their business strategy. So I think it's going to be 2021, 2022 before we start to see the fruits of all the conversations that are happening today on the coal face.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, even the time management to build new facilities as well, right? These take years to build anyway. So you're right. We're definitely at the early stage, but I'm sure you're seeing the same volume of conversation. It's every day, and it's apparent for anyone in the industry. So look, I think we'll probably wrap it up here. Thanks again, Kyle, for coming on and telling us a little bit about yourself and uTenant. And I highly recommend anyone with any questions or interest about uTenant or the service, the warehouse matchmaking capability of the business, to reach out to Kyle directly. If you've got any also questions, you can leave them in the comment section below. And yeah, have a great day. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Cheers.